Be able to see that, Kyle.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay,
perfect.
good. Well, thanks for having me, Kyle, and everybody for joining today. A little bit about myself. Born and raised in South Texas, and also spent a lot of time in Central Texas and the Hill Country. I have a family ranch in Uvalde County, but essentially I stayed pretty local after an interest in the outdoors and hunting and fishing, and went to school at Texas A&M Kingsville. That was from 2009 to 13, and I did a range and wildlife management degree there. And then I got offered to go out west to Sul Ross State University in Alpine, and studied pronghorn there from 2013 to 15. And after defending my thesis on pronghorn management and the stuff we did out there, I applied for a few parks and wildlife jobs, and was fortunate to get this position in 2015. And so I've been here since. And so my job is to provide technical guidance and assistance to landowners and the public and partners within about a 5 county area: Dallas, Ellis, Kaufman, Navarro, as well as Freestone County. And so kind of beyond that, a lot of what I'm able to do with my position in our area too is to provide outreach and assistance to landowners with prescribed fire, as well as burning on our public land like WMAs. But I've been burning since I started with Parks and Wildlife, about 9 burns a year with landowners usually, and a few burns prior to that back in college. But in general, I've done about 90 burns over my career, and currently a firefighter type 1 for our National Wildfire Coordinating Group, which is kind of how we have our standards for to get fire trained and all that kind of good stuff. So, Cal, if you're ready, I can jump into the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think hopefully everyone's here, or we got most everyone at least. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and get started, it'd be great.
Well, good. Well, again, thanks for having me. The topic that we picked on was weather, prescribed fire weather, and I hope to provide just some basic definitions and ways to obtain weather, and use weather to plan for prescribed fire. It's definitely an important component. So I'll just jump right into it. And just wanted to make just some highlights on my presentation and my background. My area is up here in Dallas, Ellis, Coffin, Navarro, but our district roughly follows that Post Oak, Savannah, Blackland Prairie, and then also in East Texas in the Piney Woods on the east side. So a lot of my experience comes from this area: a little bit higher rainfall, prairies, savannas, woodlands. And just to make that note that some of the examples today are going to be a little bit different for those more west or south or coastal areas if you are joining the call from those regions. So, and kind of a little bit more info on that too. Just again, to plan any kind of prescribed fire and really habitat management in general for wildlife, you need to understand rainfall on your area. So again, I've got my work area kind of squared off there, but we're in a 34 to 42 inch rainfall zone on average per year. Not sure if there really is an average anymore with the last few years and how we've had drought to significant rain off and on, but that's going to basically kind of tell us, hey, we might need to burn more often if grasses and fuels are more abundant. And there's a lot of other factors into that too, but just to kind of paint that picture in our rainfall area in East Texas and across the state, historical fire intervals kind of follow that. So you'll notice that the darker the red or an orange color is more often fire should be returned to a particular area, and the more brighter colors, yellow, blue, means a less often fire interval. So with our rainfall in the eastern central part of the state, you'll notice we're in kind of a 2 to 4 year return interval. And but just some ideas to show you what you should be looking for if you are burning your property or looking into it. So let's kind of move into what weather really is. And this is just your generic Google definition. So weather is a mix of events that happen each day in our atmosphere. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that. But really it is important. It's that makeup of temperature and all these different things that kind of go into what we're feeling or dealing with each day. So What we really need to know for fire is, what makes fire fire? How does it respond to fuel? How does it burn the way it does? And so from that, we have a fire triangle. So for fire to happen, we need oxygen, heat, and a fuel source. And really what prescribed fire is tweaking these variables. So if we take one of those out, theoretically the fire should stop. So if we don't have oxygen feeding it, wind, for example, the fire will dissipate. Same with the heat, and as well as a fuel source. So the grasses, the leaf litter, pine needle that we're burning in. So to take that farther, we have a fire behavior triangle. And this can get very complex and more detailed for those interested, but essentially it's made up of weather, topography, and fuel. And in this triangle, all these values or variables can change how that fire behaves, depending on the climate, the weather, if it's going uphill or downhill, if it's in a wet area or a dry hillside, as well as that amount, arrangement, and moisture of the fuel. So of those, it's always good to ask which one of these can we change. It's hard to change a lot of these in the middle of a big fire or near a prescribed fire, but essentially weather is completely uncontrollable. It's going to happen how it's going to happen. But what we can do is change the fuel as well. So if we're trying to slow down a fire, that's why we have a fire break to shut off that fuel source. Or we choose a certain unit that has different fuel types. So this is an example to show kind of what we're looking with. But we're going to concentrate on weather today and some of those variables. So to kind of jump into it, if you are interested in fire or have participated, we have a prescribed burn plan. And so for weather and the plan, it's all about having info in that plan to choose the best day to meet our goals for that particular property or burn unit, but also to meet the safety needs of the crew on site, resources that are in the area, as well as the public. And that's everything outside the burn unit. That might be your neighbor's house or a nearby town or a pasture adjacent to the area. And then, of course, weather is a big part of that burn plan. And we'll go over some details on how to decipher a weather forecast and what we're looking for to meet our safety and prescribed fire goals as well.
Hey, Taylor,
So,
sorry to stop
yes.
you. Could at the bottom of your slide, could you hit hide on the? There
Sure.
you are. Thank you, sir.
All right. I didn't know if that was visible on your end too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, and so definitely in the burn plan, we're going to look at that specific weather need, whether it's a wind direction we have to have, a certain humidity level, if we're burning in Yopon or unique fuel sources, but just some examples. So let's get back to the textbook and define a few things just briefly. One of the things we use for weather is, of course, temperature. We're looking at a forecast or we're measuring weather on site. The fancy name for that is dry bulb, and that's just essentially the ambient air temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. And so, and from that as well, we also, and again, you don't have to know all this or study it, but we also want to know kind of what the wet bulb is. And so that's generally related to evaporation, kind of moisture in the air. We also have dew point, which is actually one of the more accurate measurements for knowing the moisture in the air. And so it's proportional or related to wet bulb and relative humidity, which is what we really like to see and know when planning a fire or doing the burn. So the term for that is the ratio or the amount of moisture necessary to saturate the air at the same temperature and pressure. But essentially what RH or relative humidity is an indicator of dryness. So the drier things are, the lower the humidity will be. And in general, as temperature increases in the middle of the day, relative humidity almost always decreases. So if you feel it getting hotter, go ahead and expect that relative humidity to come down, which can lead to the fire burning hotter and fuels being more susceptible to that fire. And just to kind of show you at the bottom, we'll jump into it a little bit later, but we can measure wet bulb and dry bulb, which will give you a relative humidity with a sling psychrometer. It's a fancy tool we can use on site, and it is available if somebody wants to purchase that and learn how to use it. So also wind speed, obviously very important. But in the forecast, when you look at a weather forecast from the Weather Service or WeatherBug, whatever your app is, just always know that that's a 20-foot forecasted wind speed. That's 20 feet above the ground. But we usually want to know on a fire at eye level or fire level what that wind is. And so later on, we'll go over how to determine that based on a 20-foot wind speed in the forecast. And of course, wind direction is the cardinal direction from which the wind originates. So if I'm facing north and the wind is blowing in my face, that's a north wind. And so sometimes those get mixed up, but just remember that it's the direction that the wind originates from. And also some more terms you might hear in the fire line or in planning fire is fine dead fuels or fine dead fuel moisture. And that's essentially that continuous fuel source that we're burning in. And so if it's an open grassland burn, those fine dead fuels is that dead grass or even the live grass if it dries out. And we also have leaf litter. Those are fine dead fuels. So as you move up to that on that scale, so we also look at 10-hour fuels, and we'll go into that too, but that's essentially a twig or a larger type fuel source. But those are good indications in a regional scale of drought indication or how well woody fuels might burn on that burn day. And again, we'll go over some details there later. So great. What we're really looking for weather is to find the best burn day. And I don't know if that's really a thing to have all the perfect weather line up, but that's what we always strive for and try to find. So, but a good burn day will typically have consistent weather predictions. So just know that we're only good as what the forecaster shows us. And as we all know, weather is not perfect, and they do have the best job in the world because they're always right. So, but we do try to follow the forecast as best we can. But in general, we don't recommend burning less than 25% relative humidity. And again, that's going to be usually afternoon and before dark, the lowest RH of the day. But definitely consider the day or night after your burn. So look for that high relative humidity recovery overnight. So that's going to snuff some of the fires out or the woody vegetation that might still be burning. It's also recommended to not burn before or after a frontal passage or a cold front passage that's expected. And that's going to bring wind shifts and erratic winds, sometimes thunderstorms and rain. And again, just knowing kind of where the storms are, an isolated summer thunderstorm can send off some pretty heavy outflow winds that might reach your fire. So just be aware of what the weather is in your area nearby for the day. So great. What we're really looking for is that weather window, and typically for burning, that window is usually very narrow, to where it might be one day a week or a few days that we could plan and apply prescribed fire. So get used to checking your weather forecast, your best app or weather website, looking at those predicted models, and then track those seasonal changes. So just kind of have an idea of what spring looks like. Usually, after a cold front, things dry out. Summertime, high pressure, low pressure. But definitely look at, relative humidity, temperature, wind speed, wind direction. Those are the main 4 values that we're really trying to track when planning a good burn day. So just in Texas and in general, most recommendations for burning, and some of these are requirements. So for Parks and Wildlife or other agencies to burn, we got to follow these pretty closely. But in the forecast, winds need to be between 6 and 23 miles per hour. So not too slow and obviously not too fast. That's going to vary depending on your burn unit and fuels and location. And we usually look at about a 32 degree to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Typically, 80s is best or below to not too much heat on the crews working that fire. But also relative humidity. We want not below 25%. That's usually the cutoff point down low. And then the higher you get, the harder it is to get stuff to burn, depending on the fuel type. We'll go into some examples later. Timing is important too, so try to start after 9 a.m. and get done by 5 p.m. And also look at inversions. So we'll go over that too, just some nighttime issues or, a cap above the ground that's holding smoke and things down. But also, look for that fuel moisture, and we'll kind of show you what, how to look up fuel moistures, 10-hour fuel moistures to tell us, how well our Yopon or leaf litter might be able to burn. So moving on, I just pulled up an hourly tabular forecast from NOAA. And I took this last week just to show an example. But if I'm looking at a weather forecast And let's say I've got a prairie or a grassland type burn that I'm looking at burning, for example, on Wednesday, and this is the burn forecasted for that day. I'm going to look at temperature, obviously, to see, we're in the summertime. So if we have a crew out there working, how hot is it going to get? Do we need extra people to switch out to kind of counteract that heat? We also want to look at wind speed and wind direction. So again, consistency. We've got a north wind all day. And I kind of highlighted that between 9 and 5 p.m. window to show you when we typically burn. But I'm seeing a 5 to 6 mile per hour, 20-foot wind forecast. So we're at the minimum there, but it's consistent. But take note of that relative humidity as well. So you'll notice that it starts off pretty high, but we drop off to about 2 to 3 p.m. in that kind of 60 down to 50% range. And so that might be pretty good for a grassland burn with a lot of dead fuel, a prairie type burn, or even a pine type fuel or open pine fuel type. But just kind of show you an example of what I'm looking at when I pull up a weather forecast. But moving into the night of that day too, we want to see what that relative humidity does, right? So we've got a really good recovery up to about 96, 98% by the next morning. So that means that any heavy fuels, woody fuels, are going to be snuffed out usually by the morning due to that high moisture, high humidity. We also want to see that cap, right? So mixing height is essentially the ceiling where things mix up high in the atmosphere. So if you're burning and smoke goes up, that's going to be kind of where that smoke mixes around and dissipates. And so you'll notice, and measured in 100 feet, we drop off pretty quick after dark. We got 500 to 400 feet in that mixing height. That means there's an inversion layer overnight that's going to keep that smoke from getting up high. And it could lay over roads or homes or cause issues too. So, and with that, it might depend on your local area. So, look at atmospheric stability. Typically, we burns are better on unstable atmospheric days. So those days have higher humidity, higher mixing height, more rise and lift for that smoke. But also, again, look at the inversions. Is there fog first thing in the morning or dew? Cloudy days, which might not always be a bad thing. We burn several prairies on cloudy days that are more humid. But one thing that's unique that I think a lot of us in Texas can feel, but especially another example a few years ago with Yopon, holly, which is a shrub that is very common in a lot of East Texas due to lack of fire historically. But it's definitely a target to burn in a lot of our area of East Texas. But we had a big week-long freeze a few years ago, and the first few burns after that freeze, we noticed that the Yopon was burning really hot and very snappy, and so it got dry from that freeze to a different extent. But also looking at the fuel moistures, regionally, we can find that online from Texas Forest Service. I'll go into that later. Then always be aware of those light and variable days. If you have a really light wind, 4, 5, 6 miles per hour, that wind could come from every direction as it kind of comes up and goes down. So light days or light wind days are something to watch out for. So great. So one of the things we look at is an inversion. So, typically we have a warm air mass that's prevailing in our area and a cold air mass. A cold front moves in and pushes up under that warm air mass. And you'll notice the top of that cold air mass is that frontal inversion that moves in. We see that a lot in the wintertime, early, typically, before or during a front. And that's going to kind of affect what weather we have on the ground and how well smoke might get up and out. And typically that's followed with heavy winds initially on that cold front. Just to show you again what an inversion is. So, that top of the smoke column, if we're burning, you can kind of see it usually when you're driving on the road and you see a brush pile burning and it just stops somewhere up high and flattens out. That's what that inversion is. That's that cap in the atmosphere, whether it's down low or high, that's going to keep that smoke from lifting. And there's almost always warm air above and cold air or cool air down below. Another special situation is it goes without saying, but red flag warnings. So, look at your local, weather forecast. If you get a red flag warning, that means you should not be burning. I think it should be pretty obvious, but it tells you right there that conditions are dry and there's a potential for a fire to escape very easily. And those usually come with 10-hour fuels, less than 8%. Again, we'll show you where to find that later. but also relative humidity below 25% for several hours each day, or 20-foot winds forecasted at greater than 15 miles per hour for several hours during that day. And typically those are going to be springtime and fall time to coincide with those heavier wildfire seasons. Just something to think about and keep up with. So this is an example from a burn plan that I work with, the landowner I work with, and I believe Ellis County, grassland type burn model. But in general, in our burn plans, we're going to have an acceptable range of what weather values we would take to do the burn, but also that preferred range. And you'll notice I've got it circled there to kind of help you, understand in a plan at least, what we're looking for. So we want to have that humidity, not too low, not too hot, because we're burning in grass. It doesn't need a super low humidity to burn. But also in grassland fuels, we don't need a high wind. So 6 to 10 feet or 6 to 10 miles per hour is ideal. You'll notice there that we had that wind speed corrected for at eye level. So that's a factor to bring that 20-foot forecast down to eye level. And we'll kind of show you how to do that here in a little bit. So this is an example from a burn plan. Just one thing to keep in mind too is that weather does affect, or how weather affects fire. Generally the flames, the height or the speed, comes with that wind speed or that wind direction, as well as temperature and humidity. The smoke we have from a fire changes with wind speed and wind direction as well, but also what inversion we have up above us in the atmosphere, or might be coming later on in the day, or lake and road effects. So typically by a lake, you have a moisture gradient that can cause issues, or smoke getting down low over roads and valleys. Just some things to watch for. So let's try to obtain some weather, find out how to get our best weather forecast. And I'll go over some examples here, but my favorite option is weather.gov, NOAA. So you can type that website in, pull up the national weather or weather.gov. But there's also some apps, our websites like Weather Underground or Weather Bug. We also have ways to pull up more local weather. That's usually a tabular option, a little bit harder to read through, not as visual, but we'll show you some examples there. And then there's a plethora of other weather apps out there at your disposal. And then also too, if you are really into fire and smoke modeling, all that good stuff, there are some applications out there to look at to predict where your smoke might go when you're planning a burn. And so typically Parks and Wildlife or Forest Service can help you figure that info out, but there are some desktop downloadable softwares for vSmoke to kind of show you where that smoke might go. And also, if you had the ability with an agency to pull up a spot weather forecast, you can also track smoke that way too. So I'm going to kind of walk through some examples here. So again, my go-to is weather.gov. And if you pull up that website, you'll notice the main page here. And so I always start with just the top left and type in my zip code or locality. And so in my case, it's going to be Palestine. That's pretty close to my location. But I'm going to type that into there, hit go, and it's going to take you to the main weather page for that area. So this is a good way to kind of see what that outlook is for the next 5 or 6 days, to see if there's any rain chances coming up or different weather issues. But the best thing I want to see is to scroll down and click on hourly weather forecast or tabular weather forecast. So let's go ahead and click on hourly. And that's going to pull up a good graphic showing, the weather each day in the forecast. So there's a few things to take note on the national or in the weather.gov, format. So once we get to this page, you can toggle whichever one of these elements you want. So if you want to only see temperature and surface wind, relative humidity, rain chances, then add in things like mixing height or transport winds, you can do so. Just remember to hit submit down below, and then it's going to change what your graphs look like, what kind of weather it is showing. And so in this example, I've got temperature in the red bar, heat index in the orange, which is useful during this time of year when things get hot, and then also dew point down below. Next setup is wind speed and wind direction. So the numbers below each bar are going to show your wind speed. And then that arrow, as it points or moves around, is showing you where that direction is coming from. So you'll notice we've got a 6 mile an hour wind forecasted on September 12th from the north. And then below that, we have relative humidity in that green bar. And so that's going to show us how that RH changes throughout the day and at night. And then other things too are sky cover. So that's useful to know if it's going to be really cloudy that day, typically a more humid day, as well as that rain chance or precipitation chance as well. But from here, a lot of times I'll click on anywhere within the graph, and it'll pull up that tabular hourly forecast as well. So you'll notice we can click on tabular here, or we can jump right to the hourly, and then kind of move between each day. So you can change forward to 2 days ahead or 2 days behind if you keep moving ahead in the weather. But if you click in this graph, it'll pull up that tabular weather forecast. And again, it's the same kind of data, but it's broken down just in tabular form. So it's a good way to kind of see, how the wind changes each day and all the weather variables too. So, and again, you can toggle from different 2-day sections or windows, about up to about 5 or 6 days from when you're looking at the weather from. So kind of moving on from there, WeatherBug's another useful app that I use personally on my phone. But if you have WeatherBug, you can follow a 10-day weather forecast, which is nice for the outlook ahead. So it'll pitch you out a little bit farther than the weather.gov will or the NOAA forecast will. And so let's go ahead and click on the 10-day forecast. And that's going to give us, I didn't show it here, but it's going to give us a 10-day window, kind of the max temp, the feel like temp that day, rain chances, wind, etc. But if we go back over to that hourly forecast, that's going to show you that daily or that hourly weather throughout the day. And you can kind of scroll left and right to go later in the day or earlier in the day. And then if you click on each one separately, well, there's your 10-day there. I had them mixed up. So, but if you click on each time slot too, sometimes it should be able to pull up, extra weather info for you. So WeatherBug's pretty good. I think it's like all the apps, they're all about as accurate as it can be, but that's a pretty useful one there. Weather Underground's another good one that a lot of folks have. If you get your own remote automated weather station, a lot of folks sign up through Weather Underground and they can add their weather station to the map. And so that way, if they share their link to their weather station, people can see what that weather is locally, what the kind of rainfall they got, if you do want to share that or try that out. So. But again, once you open the app or the website, just search for your location, and it'll pull up a today's weather, an hourly forecast, as well as a 10-day forecast. You can even pull up historical weather as well. So I'm going to click on that hourly weather, and again, it's going to show us that same info, what the temp is changing throughout the day, the feel like temp, rain chances, humidity level as it goes up and down, wind speed, wind direction over here on the right. But it's pretty useful. It also shows you sunrise time, sunset time, moon phase, if that's something you're interested in. So, and again, it'll show you that 10-day forecast, so you can kind of really plan ahead if you see a day in the near future to start planning out ahead and reaching out to folks to plan a burn. So, again, weather.gov, good for the hourly forecast and a more close-up time slot. So if we're burning this week, I'm going to look at weather.gov. And if I want to see what that 10-day window is, looking out way ahead, some of these other apps can give us that ability. But just keep in mind that the weather is going to change drastically, based on the models and the weather predictions as they update these forecasts. So another useful tool that is pretty new with the National Weather Service or with NOAA, weather.gov as well is a fire weather dashboard. You can type that into Google. It should be able to pop up as well on your on the main weather.gov page, but the link is at the bottom of this slide. I can kind of stop on it in a minute, but essentially once you open it up, it's going to show you what all is going around, what's going on in the country right now, weather-wise, where those high pressure, low pressure systems are, cold fronts, wind passages, any storms on the radar popping up, hurricanes, etc. We can scroll down for your location and just know that it's always going to default to someplace in Minnesota. I think the guys that created this were from that area, and it's still a pretty new tool, but you can find your current location. But what I like about this is it does give you kind of a good summary of every day in that 6 or 7 day weather window. And so each day it's going to give you a max and minimum temperature, max and minimum relative humidity, the wind speed, wind gusts each day, the mixing height as it changes, and all that good stuff. But it's a good way to kind of track or summarize all the weather each day of the week. And again, if you click on each of these, it'll pull up a more detailed tabular forecast, similar to what we looked at earlier. So moving on from looking at weather and pulling weather, it's also useful to think about having weather, on site. So whether that's a weather station you have, or a Kestrel, which is a handheld weather device, or even a belt weather kit. If you burn with Parks and Wildlife or other agencies, you might have seen a belt weather kit in action. But those are useful to have for one, to have weather locally. We have our forecast, but a lot of times on the ground the day of, the weather does not always follow what the forecast is, and that might be due to local conditions or just the fact that it's not a perfect science. But again, it's good to have a way to check it locally on site, and so it's going to help your burn boss, your crew. You can report that weather to the National Weather Service, help with future planning as well. But for taking weather on site, whether you do get a Kestrel or a kit, or you're looking at different weather apps that we'll go into in a minute, it's definitely, at minimum, look at temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and wind direction. And it's also good to take notes as well. So keep a track of how that weather changed throughout the day. And, any erratic changes in fire behavior, just keep good notes of that. It'll help, especially if things go haywire at the end of the burn, or you need to report that later on. It's good to have, a good report of what all you saw, and observed during that burn. So just some information on those two weather options. So a belt weather kit is going to be something you take manually, and it takes some learning and getting used to try to use a belt weather kit. Typically they range from $170 to $200. And the main tool in there is a sling psychrometer. And so it's kind of a rotating tool that'll give you that dry bulb and wet bulb temperature. And in that weather kit, there's some graphs to kind of help you find the relative humidity and dew point based on that wet bulb and dry bulb. There's also apps that allow you to put in those variables, and it'll spit the information out for you as well. But the weather kit's going to have a compass, a wind meter, which is going to help you kind of see what that wind speed is and the wind gusts are, as well as more accuracy kind of locally, or being able to use that weather kit is good for accuracy. Another option is a Kestrel, about the same price, but that's a digital weather device. There's many options out there, from sizes to ones you can put on a tripod and use your phone with Bluetooth to read off the weather values for you. You kind of set that Kestrel off to the side while you're burning that day. But it's going to give you the same kind of weather variables, temperature, humidity, etc., but other things as well. It's going to spit out dew point, max wind gust, or max humidity, minimum humidity, while you're taking the weather. So, again, on-site weather is really important, because you have our forecast, but the forecast does not always line up with what we're dealing with the day of or during the burn. So it's good to always know kind of how that weather changes. And if you see a big drop in humidity, you can expect a big change in fire behavior as well. So another option too to always check into, and you might already be aware, is outdoor burn bans. So check out the Texas A&M Forest Service website, or just go into Google and type in burn bans in Texas. This was taken just a few days ago. Unfortunately, all my counties are in a burn ban. So if anybody's getting rain, please send that my way. We got a few burn units planned out. So, but definitely check this. But also, if you're in a certain county and you're unsure if this is accurate, check your local county website. I know for Ellis County, for example, they're a little bit late at times getting the update out to the Forest Service and getting this app updated. And another useful tool that we have to follow, and really anybody too, in certain areas of the state, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which in a large part with fire is smoke management. And so they kind of monitor smoke and air quality throughout the state, environmental concerns. But in Texas, with major metropolitan areas, big cities, those counties that are highlighted, especially Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Tyler, Longview, El Paso, they have these things called ozone action days. And so between March and November, In our burn plans, or in Texas, you're required to reach out and double check to make sure your county or area, if you're in these areas, these highlighted counties, is not within an ozone action day or an attainment zone. So essentially, that means that the air quality is poor enough that if you let off smoke, it's negative. It's not great for the environment. And so during that growing season time, that's a requirement for us to have to check if we're in an ozone day or not. And so at the bottom, you've got a link here to pull up this web page with TCEQ, and here you can scroll to each attainment area. And so again, if you're in that Dallas Fort Worth zone, for example, if I'm in Ellis County, I can look at that outlook and see, if those days are good or not good for air quality. And so, for example, if it's green or yellow, good or moderate air quality, we are okay to burn. But if it's orange, red, purple, maroon, those darker colors, that means that the ozone is not permittable for burning. So air quality is much poorer, and the recommendation and requirement is to not burn on those days. So that's one thing that we follow in our burn plans, and it's good to know kind of which county you're in if you're going to burn in March to November time frame. In the wintertime, it does not apply, as far as I know. Another useful tool, you can reach this through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ's website, but there's a Fire and Smoke Now or Fire Air Now website. Again, I've got the link down there. This is pretty neat because it pulls up pretty much the whole country, even Canada, and it's going to show you where satellite picked up hotspots are. So if a satellite sees a hotspot or some heat, it's a good way for folks to learn where the wildfires might be. But it's also going to show you all these bubbles, kind of what the current air quality measurements are. And so, for example, if I click on one of these green dots, it's going to tell me if the air quality is good, poor, moderate, etc. And also what prescribed fires are going on and what wildfires are currently active. And so this was taken a few days ago, I think on Saturday, and there was a few wildfires going on up in Northwest Texas. And I think there was a prescribed fire in Oklahoma going on here. But it's good to kind of track on what's going on in your area, what that air quality might be, and to kind of track your fire too. So some good, general rules for burning in Texas. And we'll start kind of broad with Texas in general. So we have what we call the 60-40 rule. And so if you haven't heard of that, that really what that means is that the temperature should be less than 60 degrees Fahrenheit with the relative humidity greater than 40%. So again, not super dry. And also surface winds forecasted from 6 to 10 miles per hour. And so those three basic weather guidelines are pretty good for somebody that's just getting into prescribed burning, that needs a really safe day to try to tackle the fire. And for any type of burn, we always recommend to check those transport winds and make sure they're at least 8 miles per hour or above. Because if not, that smoke is just going to sit there, or it's not going to go anywhere up high. It's just going to dissipate slowly into the atmosphere. We also have the mixing height, generally 1,600 feet or above is a requirement for burning as well. So if it's a good clear day, warm day, typically that's not an issue. That mixing height is pretty high, as well as good transport winds too. So with the 20-foot wind forecast that we get in the forecast, let's break that down a little bit. So this is an example to show kind of what sheltering is with that wind forecast. So let's say, for example, we've got a hill slope and some trees, and depending on where you're at in this graphic, it's going to kind of tell you what that 20-foot wind feels like at eye level. And so if you start here on the left, we're on a flat slope or level ground, and we're surrounded by pretty tall trees. You can basically cut that 20-foot wind forecast down to a third of that 20-foot wind forecast at eye level. If you move into a more scattered wooded area, more open pine or savanna type fuel type, generally you can cut that 20-foot wind forecast in half. And so it might be a 10 or a 9 miles per hour at eye level. When you start adding significant slope into the picture, it does change things a little bit. But in general, if you're on an unsheltered fuel, again, a prairie or open grassland, it might be over half of that 20-foot wind forecast is felt at eye level. So this graphic is useful for kind of showing you some generalities. So if we've got a 16-mile-per-hour, 20-foot forecast, and we're in an open field or grassland, generally we're going to feel that 8 to 9.6 miles per hour of that 20-foot forecast. So we call that a 0.5 or a 0.6 factor, depending on how open the landscape is around you. We also have a partial sheltering. And so that means if you're in a savanna or an open pine, pretty low basal area site, surrounded by some trees, you're going to cut that down to about 3, 0.3 of that 20 feet forecast. So that might be a 5.3 miles per hour wind at eye level from that 20-foot wind forecast of 16 miles per hour. And if you're completely in the woods, again, that might be a 0.2 or a 0.3 factor, meaning there's very little wind felt at eye level in the middle of the woods, really sheltered site. Just some other things to think about too. Avoid burning with easterly wind forecast. In our part of the state, at least the eastern half of the state, east winds usually come with a lot of shifting of that wind direction. We also want to look out for gusts in the forecast. Know what your local relative humidity threshold might be. And so for us in East Texas, a lot of folks that burn in Yopon or typical woodland type burns, you might start getting spotting and issues with Yopon burning too hot if it's down below 30%. Whereas on the coast, if you're burning in saltgrass, for example, they can burn that type of fuel in a much higher relative humidity. So where we're burning in 30% fuels in East Texas, those folks in the south are going to be maybe 50, 60% relative humidity. And then again, just assume subtle to extreme changes off of forecasts. So weathermen aren't perfect. They can only do their best and put a model out there for us and put the best forecasts out there they can for us. But always expect the worst and plan for those weird weather changes and shifts in the forecast. And just some examples too of when looking at weather, avoid extremes. And so I took this, pulled this on Saturday for yesterday's forecast in Dalhart, Texas. So again, way up in Northwest Texas, Great Plains. But when we're looking at a weather forecast and planning a day, it's okay to make some changes or some special situations happen. But if we've got a really high wind or high wind gusts and a really low humidity, that's grounds for extreme fire behavior. That can mean if that fire gets out, it's just going to keep going and not stop. And at the other end of that too, let's say we had low relative humidity, but a really low wind speed, that could compensate to where maybe we'll be okay burning on lower humidity because we have a lower wind. But again, it depends on your local climate, your fuel type, and what your goals are too. But again, just watch out for those extremes in the weather forecast. High winds, low humidity, high heat, things like that. So this is a pretty dry day up there on Sunday in West Texas. So, and some notes, like I mentioned earlier, on fuel moisture, just to show you how we kind of size up different fuel types. In general, a fuel moisture is the measure of the amount of water in a fuel, vegetation, or fuel source available to a fire. So, for example, completely dry fuel equals a fuel moisture of 0. And so with different fuel sizes, we have a 1-hour fuel, which is grass, for example, leaf litter, pine needles. That's that smallest fuel size. What 1 hour means is if there's moisture or that fuel is saturated, it's going to dry out within an hour if conditions warrant that. So 1-hour fuels dry really quickly and take in moisture really quickly. And so are the ones that change the most. 10-hour fuels are like twigs and small branches, anywhere from 1/4 to 1 inch in size. 100-hour fuels are shrubs, so that may be a small mesquite tree or a small yopon bush. That's a 1 to 3 inch size and diameter stem. And then 1,000-hour fuel is 3 to 8 inches in diameter. So that's trees, hardwoods, pine trees, etc. And just know too that if you are going to look at fuel moisture and predicted fuel moisture, from some of these different websites that I'll show you in a minute, just know that these things are going to change locally from where you're at and by season and fuel structure. And so one thing we can do in East Texas is track Yopon fuel moisture. So ways to find fuel moisture. I like to use RAWs. So again, remote automated weather stations. You can type in RAWs weather into Google or type in this website above, and you can pull up the RAWs map. So what this is, these are dedicated remote weather stations around the state. And so if I'm burning over here kind of near Palestine, we're up here by Dallas, I can click on the dot and it's going to pull up that local, I think to the 15 or 30 minute interval, what those weather stations are recording each day. So for example, if I pulled up Athens, Texas, which is right here up in Northeast Texas, it's going to show me, by the hour, what the weather is at that station. And that's usually pretty on par with what you might be feeling locally as well. So we can see how that temperature changes throughout, or has changed throughout the day. Let's say we're right here at 12 o'clock. The one thing that's unique or nice about RAWS is it does have the fuel moisture average that is shown for that area. And so if we're burning in the woods or, woody fuels, we want to try to set back some understory brush, we're looking at a 7 to 14% fuel moisture in those 10-hour fuels. And so this right here is showing you exactly what that 10-hour fuel moisture is hourly. So if we started the day off at 6, 7 a.m., we can see we've got a high fuel moisture in those woodies, the 10-hour fuel, but we're dropping down into 7, 6% by 11 or 12 o'clock. So if you start getting below 7%, in general in East Texas, that's going to mean higher fire probability, a better chance to burn in those woodland fuel types. And if it gets much lower than 7, issues like spotting or a fire escape could be increased as well. But in general, this is a good way to check on RAWS kind of what your local fuel moisture is for that 10-hour fuel type. So another useful tool through our partners at Texas A&M Forest Service is predictive services. So you can type in Texas Fire Predictive Services or just use this website link right here. And there's a lot of different graphs and things you can look at on this website that vary. You can spend all day kind of looking through that website. But one good thing is to see you can see the weather outlook for Texas, at the 1, 2, or 3 day mark. And so what I showed here was just today's outlook. And this first graphic on the left is the general observed fire danger. So it's a pretty simple graphic that just shows, there's a low in the green, low potential for fire to escape or get out, moderate in blue, high up here in the panhandle. But also what we look at too, and a lot of this is more detailed information you don't always have to be aware of, but it's going to help us kind of track, how well things might burn. So, ERC, energy release component, and then BI is your burning index. Again, that's just going to show us, what kind of conditions are going on around the state for high fire escape potential or wildfire potential. But again, if you go to predictive services, you can pull up some similar links to get you to RAWS or to see what that 10-hour fuel predicted is for the next 2 or 3 days. So you can kind of track. If you're burning in the woods, you can kind of see where that 10-hour fuel type is or what that moisture might be in a couple of days. But again, Texas A&M Forest Service Predictive Services, that's a really good website to check out. So again, this is information, burn type considerations for the Post Oak Savanna, Blackland Prairie, East Texas, kind of that central to East Texas area. And some of this applies to the rest of the state too, but this is what we generally follow in the eastern 2/3 or third of the state rather. So if you're burning in the open areas, more grassland or prairie type burns, we recommend temperatures between 30 to no more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Relative humidity and grass fuel types, 30 to 40% RH. Again, that's going to change on how thick your dead fuel is or your thatch is, how the winds are too. But generally, winds on the low end, 6 to 12 miles per hour at most to burn in the grassland fuel type. So moving on to the woods, let's say we're burning in a hardwood woodland, in Yopon or oak trees, something similar like that. We're looking at temperatures 30 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Relative humidity, 25 to 40%. If we're working with a landowner that has Yopon as the main target for trying to set back in that burn, we're going to go down to 23%. So 23% is the lowest RH that we're really allowed to burn in. And so I just wanted to make that note that 25% is okay, is really our usual low. But if it's a Yopon type fuel or type burn, we're going to go a little bit lower. And you need more wind to push into the woods typically. So 10 to 23 miles per hour is the wind speed we're looking at. That's going to vary again on if you have woods outside of your wooded burn area. If there's a wide open field outside of your woodland burn area, are the woods really thick? Do you need a lot of wind to push through them? As well as how good your fire breaks are as well on what that wind speed might be. And then again, try to get your fuel moisture in that 7 to 10% zone if you're trying to burn in the woods. And that's going to enhance that understory woody control like yaupon and other shrubs as well. So if you're in a pine situation, we don't need that hot of a day. And so, typically these are, March, April, or February through early April. We're looking at 30 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidities don't need to be as low for pine. And so we can get up to 50% RH and probably have pretty good results in a pine needle or pine type fuel type, depending on the local conditions and what kind of site it is, et cetera. So, and again, the winds pretty much follow the woodland fuel type too. So one last example for a lot of this part of the state or really anywhere, if you have an old growth prairie that has not been burned in many years where you have thick and abundant tall grasses, a lot of dead thatch from years of growth, or you're in a KR or old world blue stem situation where you have a monoculture of really thick KR blue stem, those type of fuels burn really hot and really fast depending on the weather. And so just to make note, if you're burning in these type of situations, it's about a similar temperature gradient to the grassland burn, but you want to keep your RH a little bit higher typically. So if you have a lot of dead thatch, you can get away with a higher relative humidity, which does keep things safer for you and your burn. And again, try to keep those winds a little bit lower, 6 to 8 miles per hour, as opposed to 6 to 12 miles per hour. But these are general recommendations for burning in these different fuel types in about East Texas. So that kind of wraps up most of what we're going to talk about today on weather. Again, just be prepared for the worst so you can enjoy the best on your burn. And so if you're like me, you're going to spend every day just pulling up the weather forecast to try to, see what days might be coming up to do a burn in. But 90% or so of burning is planning. The 10% should be the easiest part. Lighting that match, doing the prescribed burn, and having fun while you're doing it. But just know that planning is a huge component. And the more you plan, the safer you should be and the better things should go. So, and with that, I'll take any questions if Mr. Kyle allows me to. And I would be glad to share this presentation with anybody that would like it. And if you need my contact info, that's my email right there and my phone number as well.
It's all phenomenal, Taylor. Thank you so much.
Good.
Yeah, it looks like we got a few questions coming in.
Okay.
All right, Taylor, what are the most common reasons and goals for prescribed burning, in your opinion?
Sure. So common reasons and goals for prescribed burning, again, that's going to vary depending on where you're at in the state. But the best benefits and reasons to think about fire for land management, for one, it's good wildfire suppression, protecting your land or area if you're in a wildfire prone area. But mainly from a wildlife management standpoint or even range management, it's a good way to set back fuel or set back your grasses and fords, enhance diversity on your property. It's a good way to set back woody vegetation on your property. It's naturally going to fertilize, get that ash back into the soil. It's a good way to clean the slate and kind of add diversity. A lot of wildlife like to have not much thatch down on the ground. And so fire is a good way to kind of remove that thatch, enhance forbs and wildflowers, which is food for wildlife and that kind of good stuff. So, but typically if we're doing a burn plan, the goals are for wildlife management and then to have a safe and effective prescribed fire operation. So that way nobody gets hurt, everybody learns something, and we get a good burn done and good ecological effects from doing that burn. So.
Excellent. All right. And what RH do you recommend for leaf litter in a woodland area?
So, that's a good question. I kind of alluded to the yaupon, or woodland type fuel type. So if we're burning an oak leaf litter, you're going to usually need a lower relative humidity. A lot of that's going to depend on, how wet things have been recently. And so, for example, if I'm burning in an area that has yaupon or some woods and leaf litter, I want to wait till 2 to 3 weeks after a rain event. So that way those woods are dried out and that leaf litter is nice and crispy, because it does take a little bit lower humidity to get it to burn. And it's tricky to kind of find that exact sweet of timing, to where you have the right weather. But generally, 30, maybe 28% is probably a safe humidity to start thinking about burning your woods in. But always be aware that once you get into the 20s, at least in our area of East Texas, I always see that RH get down even lower in the middle of the afternoon. And so if you're getting humidities below 30 in the forecast, always expect it to dip even lower. And so be prepared to stop, or keep that fire from, going too far if the humidity is getting too low. So.
Excellent. So we probably need to cut it off. I'll answer all the other remaining questions. Or if there's any other specific ones, y'all might just reach out, email me. I know Taylor's got a busy schedule, so I can get anything to him as well. And also, we're going to have this recording available probably in the next couple of days if y'all want to review it. And anyways, Taylor, I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Sure. Hey, glad to help. And yeah, if you like, I'll put my phone number and email in the chat box too. But anybody has questions, reach out. Glad to help. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
I hope everyone has a good day, and we'll talk soon.